We built a gateway to a star, 1,470 light years from Earth. And I can't keep what we saw on the other side a secret anymore. On December 2nd, 1987, the Soviet Deep Space Network received a transmission from outer space. It was first picked up by the Galenkii RT-70 radio telescope and soon confirmed by the other telescopes within the system. The signal, which repeated every day for about 2 weeks, came from KIC 8462852. Today, more famously known as Tabby's star. It's an F-type main sequence star located in the constellation Cygnus, approximately 1,470 light years from Earth. Unusual light fluctuations of the star, including up to 22% dimming in brightness, were discovered by citizen scientists as part of the Planet Hunters project. These observations puzzled the scientific community, which is yet to explain what kind of natural phenomenon could cause such a massive dip in brightness in a star. My team, however, wasn't as surprised. Given the transmission and the nature of its content, we felt confident that the dimming of Tabby's star must have been the result of some kind of artificial megastructure, such as a Dyson swarm. The transmission contained 2 datasets. The first was the mathematical blueprint of a large rectangular structure resembling a door frame, and the second was a date, communicated to us with the help of a number of illustrations of our solar system where the planet's orbits around the sun were used to indicate the passage of time. It only took us a week to figure out which date it was. November 18th, 2019. But we weren't able to figure out what would happen on that date. Although, as you can probably guess by now, we know. We spent decades trying to build the structure, and almost lost our funding several times, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But slowly and surely, we kept trying and trying and trying. And then, around the same time Tabby's star began appearing in the media, we finally finished it. It looked sublime. A giant gateway standing at the center of our Siberian facility in the middle of nowhere. It didn't have any visible features, except a hole at the top, but it consisted of billions of intricate circuits, cooled down to around negative 237 degrees, and it was powered by a small nuclear reactor. Even though the entire facility was as cold as Antarctica, not just because of the dilution refrigerators but also the harsh weather outside, I was still sweating when we were about to turn the power on for the first time. When we did, nothing happened. No matter what we tried, we couldn't get it to do anything. For years, all we could do was to monitor it. It was disappointing, really, especially after all the hard work we had put into it. Our last hope was the mysterious date. And after it had come to pass, everything changed. On Monday, November 19th, 2019, at 23:54, an object entered Earth's atmosphere above the Pacific Ocean. To the unsuspecting astronomers around the globe, it looked identical to a small meteor. But we knew better. An Aleida-class submarine was deployed with me on board together with the rest of the crew. The object came down on Disappointment Island, an uninhabited island in the Auckland Islands archipelago. It felt surreal stepping ashore, not knowing what kind of alien artifact we would find there. It was during the hour of fading twilight when we arrived, and the birds swarming the island, as if in apprehension aroused an eerie sensation crawling up my spine. We found the object inside a crater. It was spherical, about as large as a pool ball, and its surface looked like the surface of the giant structure we had built in Siberia. Unlike our construction, however, this dark sphere was active. It took some time for us to understand that, though, since its activity was only audible. "Quiet," I said to the soldiers that had stepped ashore with me. "Listen." None of us moved a muscle while we stood around the crater. There was an echo of slow, dragging footsteps coming from the sphere. It didn't sound like a recording, more as if we heard something actually happening in front of us. The footsteps stopped for a minute, and then continued until they faded out completely. After that, at least as far as we could hear beneath the agitated birds on the windy island, the sphere was silent. A brave soldier volunteered to touch the sphere, making sure it was safe, and after that we moved it to the submarine. It wasn't as heavy as it looked, but as if it was hollow. During our entire voyage back to Russia, I sat next to the sphere, listening carefully. It was mostly silent, but now and then I could hear the echo of something that reminded me of metal scraping against metal. Although I couldn't explain what it was that I heard, or by which means I could hear it, it still felt ominous and foreboding. Back at the freezing facility, we soon discovered that the sphere would fit perfectly within the hole at the top of the structure. And thus, that is what we had been missing all these years. The last piece to our puzzle. "It has traveled through space for more than 1,000 years, my colleague and dear friend Dmitri told us, although we already knew it. "Alexander," he said, and looked up to me from his wheelchair. "You really heard footsteps?" I nodded. "Amazing," Sonia, our chief engineer, said. "Alien footsteps from 1,000 years." I cleared my throat, interrupting her. I'm not so sure that these sounds are recordings," I said, and looked at my colleague's uncertain eyes. "There have been no repetitions so far," I continued. "Every sound we've heard has been unique, and there have been several hours of recordings." "What are you trying to say?" Dmitri asked, anticipating an answer beyond his wildest imagination. "Are you suggesting—" "It's just a thought. A hypothesis at best. But I think we have to consider that the sound has something to do with the obvious function of this black orb. The structure is clearly meant to be a doorway, and this spherical component, as you all probably think as well, is most likely what will open that doorway. What will connect our world to their world." "You mean this thing is already connected to—" Sonia began without finishing. I bit my frozen lip nervously, collecting my thoughts. If I would have to guess, I would say it's entangled with an identical object on the other side on a quantum level, somehow allowing us to hear what is happening 1,000 light years away in real time. And although it's beyond our knowledge how, I do believe that it's through this entanglement that the sphere will allow us to go there, perhaps in an instant, if we were to place it inside the hole on the top of the structure. We felt the pressure of fate, perhaps the fate of mankind, on our shoulders. "If this is true," Dmitri whispered, "it means that it goes both ways." "Oh my gosh," Sonia said with a trembling voice. "They can hear us." We proceeded to set up a soundproof chamber in which we put the sphere together with microphones so that we could observe its activity without it being able to observe us. While we studied it, trying to find as many clues as possible about what to expect on the other side, we began talking about what to do next. At this point, the higher-ups in the Russian Space Forces, and even in the government, had suddenly become extremely interested in our little, underfunded team of engineers and researchers. They sent in analysts, diplomats, and generals who all wanted their say in the matter of how to proceed. I will not dwell on the politics of it all, but it quickly became a mess, and its first victim was unsurprisingly the scientific method. My team wanted to study the sphere for maybe 2 years before putting it inside the structure, not only to learn as much as possible, but also to be safe. But the generals, only caring about their careers, didn't want us to sit on this longer than a few months, and in the end, even though we had still only heard strange metallic scraping from the sphere, they decided on a very simplistic plan. Namely, to put the sphere in place, send in a probe, and then, if it looked safe, send a team through what was assumed to be a gateway to another world. They didn't listen to our warnings about rushing things, but they did at least take the potential threat seriously enough to prepare for it in the way we asked for. Since we knew next to nothing about the beings who sent us the sphere, except that they were thousands of times more advanced than us, we had no choice but to prepare for the worst with the strongest defense known to man, a thermonuclear missile. Seeing the missile being rolled into the facility prior to opening the gateway was a menacing sight to behold. If something hostile were to enter from the other side, the bomb would be detonated and obliterate everything in the area. In the middle of June this year, a crane lifted the sphere up to the top of the structure. I stood next to Dmitri and the rest of my team down at the floor, alarmingly close to the armed missile. I looked at the young soldiers next to it who had been given the assignment to trigger it in the worst-case scenario. I asked myself, were they really prepared for death at their tender age? And then I thought, if so, how brave. If not, how foolish. The structure was surrounded by military guards with dogs while the generals stood on an impromptu observation deck a few hundred meters away. The probe we intended to send in was a rover sent to us from Roscosmos. A female voice spoke through the public address system and echoed through the cold facility. There might have been a way for us to avoid noise around the sphere, but since we had been ordered to go through with the mission so quickly, we hadn't had the time. This meant that everything said on our side, especially the instructions being delivered through the speakers, could be heard on the other side. It was reckless, to say the least. As we suspected, the sphere fit perfectly in the hole at the top of the structure. We didn't know what to expect, but we all expected something. A silence fell upon all of us. I didn't even dare to breathe. But nothing happened. For a moment, we thought there was something wrong. But then the dogs began barking like wild animals. It made the hair on my neck stand on its end because it meant that something had happened. We just couldn't sense it. One of the dogs got free, somehow, and ran up to the gateway. The soldier in charge of it ran after, yelling for it to stay put, but it wouldn't listen. And then, when it ran through the gateway, it vanished. A collective gasp could be heard throughout the facility, and then a concerning murmur. The gateway was, without a doubt, open. Did that dog just travel over 1,000 light years? Dmitri asked. No one said anything for a couple of minutes. fruitlessly trying to hear the dog through the sphere. And then, one of the generals spoke with authority from the speakers in the ceiling.
Send in the probe.
The rover vanished just like the dog. We all looked at the screens on the wall, which were connected to the rover through a cable that now seemed to hang in the air by itself, in suspenseful anticipation. Nothing. There was a crash coming from the sphere, and then everything went silent again. I gulped out of anxiety. We debated what might have happened, but of course there was no way for us to know. It was suggested that the rover might have fallen over by accident, and for no other reason than convenience, that was taken as a fact. Next, we put a camera on a metal bar and inserted it into the portal, and after having been retrieved 15 minutes later, we finally got to see our glimpse of what it was like on the other side. The recording was heavily distorted and didn't reveal much, just as if the camera had been subjected to some kind of radiation, although none was detected. But it was clear that there was a large, open space on the other side. The ground was too flat to be natural, and there were shadows in the distance indicating structures. Nothing of what we saw offered any explanation as to what had happened to the rover and the dog. They were nowhere to be seen. I had to argue for Dimitri to be on the team that was eventually decided to be sent through the gateway. Since he was in a wheelchair, the general in charge thought he would be a liability to the rest of the team. But I convinced him that his expertise in exobiology was absolutely necessary. Of course, that wasn't entirely true. After the accident with the Soyuz TM-5 spacecraft that put Dimitri in the wheelchair, he had spent almost all of his life working on our top secret project. I would be damned if he, my best friend, wasn't allowed to see the fruits of his own labor, and thus, I proudly helped him inside the spacesuit. Now, you'll get to be the cosmonaut you were always meant to be, I said with a smile on my otherwise weather-beaten face. We'll make history again, just like we used to back in the day. For the motherland, eh? He said, and laughed himself into a coughing fit. I think we need a drink. After this, I said, we will have deserved it. Aside from myself and my small team of scientists, a group of highly trained commando frogmen were assigned to assist us. Their presence didn't make me feel any safer. Whatever waited for us on the other side, if they greeted us with hostility, we wouldn't stand a chance. We were nothing more than pesky ants walking in through the front door of a house beyond our comprehension. Standing in front of the large gateway all suited up enhanced the sensation considerably. While saluting the generals on the observation deck, a female choir sang the national anthem. All this splendor, I whispered to Dimitri and patted his shoulder, only to cover up how infinitely small we are beneath the ancient secrets we're about to uncover. The commando next to me had to struggle in his spacesuit to make the sign of the cross. I nodded at him and smiled in an attempt to inspire some confidence. He didn't need to know that his gun would be useless. All I could hear in my helmet was my own rapid breathing, telling me how scared I really was, and the radio chatter.
Proceed forward.
It was the general. He cleared his throat and then continued with a softer voice.
Make Russia and the whole of mankind proud.
I took a deep breath. Dimitri grabbed the wheels of his chair and pushed his way toward the gateway. I hesitated for a second and looked at the people behind me. The fact that they would be over 1,000 light years away from me in a few minutes was almost impossible to wrap my mind around. Alexander, Sonia said. It's time. I helped her carry a metal crate with equipment. It made me feel somewhat safer, somehow, to walk next to her. Even though the spacesuit protected against the cold, I could still feel the extreme temperature coming from the frozen gateway. The gold visor attached to my helmet fogged from my icy breath. We all stopped right in front of the invisible threshold. That minute felt like hours. All I could see behind the gateway was the wall at the other end of the facility. There were no visual cues at all, not even the slightest vibration in the air. It made what was about to happen even harder to believe. No one said anything. The commandos made sure their guns were ready to fire. I looked at Sonia, but I couldn't see her face behind the visor. "Well then," Dmitri finally said. "Godspeed, comrades." That became the unofficial go, and we stepped over the threshold.